Recording by now. I don't, yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to the March 6th Kubernetes Steering Committee public meeting. Some house rules. This meeting is recorded, so please be aware of what you say and do in this meeting. Also, whenever we are having conversation, please do abide by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct Committee, Kubernetes Code of Conduct, and which just essentially means like please be nice to everyone. And with that, let's start the meeting. Before that, does anyone want to volunteer as a note taker? Any takers?
I can.
Cool. Thank you, Tim. Let me just share my screen. Okay. I think the notes should be also on the screen, and I will share a copy in our chat again so that people can open up the notes. So yeah, we'll go through the agenda, but if you have anything to add to the agenda, please feel free to do so in a meanwhile. And let's get started with the follow-up items. We don't have anything to vote today or anything as CNCF updates. First, I think Tim already has an update on this Kubernetes steering and code of conduct committee resolution thing. Tim, do you have anything that you want to say in the meeting?
No, other than it keeps being low on my list because it didn't get done ahead of the election, which means I have all the time ahead of the next election. But yeah, I got to get that done.
Cool. Awesome, Tim. Thank you so much. The next item I think was on Ben. It was about the visa letters that we might write to support applicants for various kinds of visas, be it for coupon or any other reason. I don't see Ben on the meeting, so we'll probably take it like async. Next up is the PR to split chairs and TLs. I think Bob, that's on you. Do you have anything to say about it?
The PR is out. It could still use a bit more acts from steering before start socializing it wide. I did try and keep it very tightly scoped to just the split. There are definitely some things that need to be done as follow-up items. Honestly, the SIG governance doc is kind of a mess in terms of formatting, and there's also some things that are very out of date that just no one is doing. Like no one is writing a KEP to create a subproject that we should just remove or update to make sure it's actually in line with what we're doing today. But that can happen after the split.
Cool. I missed another point, which was the subproject leads stuff. That is on me. I am mostly going to work on it this week and have a draft ready for everyone to look at. There's an update from my side. About annual reports. Christoph, are you on point on this? Or
it's kind of everyone.
I think we all are with respect to getting information from the SIGs. So I had a question regarding this. So if any of the SIG right now wants to spin down, what's the process? Do we have it documented other than like maybe asking approval from us and spinning down the docs and sending some comms to the community? I was wondering like what else do we have if somebody wants to spin down?
Should be in governance, MD. You just check.
Yeah. In general, it's sort of the inverse order of provisioning a SIG. So it's like, spinning down the channel, the accounts and things like that.
There's some extra things that we technically have to do around in SIGs in particular, because SIGs can own code.
Yeah.
That everything that they own code-wise either needs to be deemed archived and retire it, or it needs ownership transfer over to another SIG.
Awesome. That answers the question right now. Maybe we can noodle in the docs. If we don't have something, we can write some steps based on the discussion that we had right now. Cool. Are there any questions on annual reports? I see a lot of people who are from the general community joining. Like, do you have any questions on the annual reports that you need to write as part of your SIG or working group? No questions, then you can reach out to your license over various ways like email or reach out to them on Slack. That's the best way to reach. Awesome. I don't think we have any more follow-up items. So let's hop on to the next one, which is Kubernetes at the Open Infra Summit.
Hello.
Bob, hey, hi.
Sorry. So this is I added this. So I brought it up in the SIG contributor experience meeting last week, but basically some of you might be familiar with the project team gathering that we have been having virtually every 6-ish months within the open infra community. A lot of OpenStack projects, services gather there to talk about technical things, kind of plan for the next release and focus on integration with other projects. And we will actually be having our first in-person one during the Open Infra Summit, which is June 13th through 15th. And I wanted to make sure that the Kubernetes community was aware that you are definitely invited. We would just want to know by, I think I said April 2nd, if you're interested in participating. And all of that is outlined in the issue that I made. And I also sent the issue to the mailing list, and I also dropped it in provider OpenStack Slack channel. So just wanted to raise it with you all as well. We will be having a virtual one before then, but I think it is it's the very last week of March, actually. Holy moly, that's like coming up very quick. But we would really love to see you at the in-person one if you're interested. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Kendall, for that update. Do we have anything to talk about? I don't see anything on the agenda. Or do we go into the open discussion territory if we have anything to discuss right now?
I mean, I think the big one again with the annual reports is just making sure that all the liaisons are pushing along with SIGs. Yeah, I think we've been in a bit of a hibernation for a little bit. So I think that's the big one in my head.
Same. The dates have felt far away in the spring, and KubeCon has felt far away, but it's starting to get close. It's all gonna roll together very rapidly in the next few weeks.
Arno, you have your hands raised.
Is it the moment for open discussion item?
Let's see. Does anyone have anything with respect to annual reports? Cool. I think we can have the open discussion item. Arno.
Okay. So I think James sent an email about getting clarification regarding content host in the community infrastructure. So I'm curious if there's like some conversation happening about this or early feedback.
I don't think steering on the whole is up to date yet. especially with the most recent conversations starting the past week in Kate's Infra.
But I'm talking about emails sent in last month.
It
So-
was specifically around resolving the clarification of SIG Kate's Infra being delegated control to make decisions on the infra.
Yes.
Sorry, I
Uh,
misunderstood that. I think this honestly, like, we probably need to look closer at the charter and make sure it's explicitly scoped in there. To like, I have not looked at it. I'm sorry. It's I don't really have a good excuse for it, but that would be where I think like the refinement of that needs to happen.
Yeah, so I think it's been a bit since any of us have reviewed that charter in particular. So let's try to dig up this email. Because it's a worthwhile discussion, and I think, you know, the question around where are the boundaries for infrastructure and who can make decisions, I think it does, you know, or at least to date has been, you know, a steering conversation, and perhaps we can look at what it means to loosen the reins a little bit.
I've pasted a link to the email from Dims.
Thank you, Nabra.
Arno, who is the Kate's Infra liaison, if you know off the top of your head?
Stephen.
Hi, friend.
So maybe that is something can work with them during the annual report process to look at the charter and firm up the language.
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds
specific
great.
on this. This may not be what Arno brought up, but I think there's a pretty big related topic in that there's current major decision making being discussed with broad sweeping impact.
Can I ask
we
one
don't have any-
question still, just back up on the charter?
Mhm.
Like Tim's email, like when I read it back then, it was sort of, it felt like conditioned on if you think there's a problem. I glanced at the charter back then and glancing at it now, I feel like it can cover the need, but is somebody worried about a specific thing? Like we need a specific sentence about a specific thing in it? Because it would maybe be easier if we were more concrete, if there's a direct worry.
Yeah, I think the issue regards specific. We freeze out case.gcr.io. I think it's about to happen next month. And one possibility is to start clean up that whole registry by deleting some specific images. I will pick, for example, the Azure CSI drivers. I will say, for example, those drivers are essential to EKS cluster, and by implication, essential to Azure customers. If we start delay those images with, let's say, a 1 month notice, I think the first question is, can we delay that image without notify Azure? Because the Azure customer consume those images first.
So I would say that, you know, I think that the content that, you know, the service, the service that Kate's Infra provides has customers, and the customers are effectively responsible for their content. So, you know, ideally the conversations that are happening about images getting deleted, content being deleted, retention policies being set, should be a broader discussion across all of those customers as well.
Okay, so now in the decision-making process related to content hosted by the community, we need to involve the customers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like if I was hosting images, I wouldn't expect them to disappear without a discussion.
They're at least for this, it's not necessarily involving the end users, but the discussion is definitely happening. And it's happening because the project is going to run out of funding if we do not make a drastic decision soon.
I think Steven's saying the customers.
I'm saying the customers are the
sub-projects.
SIGs and sub-projects. Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought, my bad. I was thinking like end user.
No. But yeah, customers in the sense that SIG Kate's Infra provides a service to all of the community.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but the example there, like EKS is a commercial offering that Amazon supports. Amazon is not a customer of the Kubernetes project. Amazon's customers are customers of Amazon. Like I feel
EKS
like
is
we're-
not pulling this direct. EKS isn't pulling this directly.
then
That-
there's no
that's,
breakage.
But there are users running clusters on Amazon that are using the AWS EBS CSI driver, which is one of the issues listed. Stepping back,
So-
this isn't the only
yeah.
example. So more generally, I think SIG Kate's Infra, we need some to ask for understanding as we're looking at not being able to stay within budget this year. The SIG is discussing ways that we can cut costs. So far, all of those have either been things that the SIG operates without directly breaking like their users, or they've been like voluntary in conjunction with SIGs. There hasn't been any instance of saying we can't afford to run this, we're turning it off. So as an example, if we step back from specific images, if we reach a point in the year where the obvious move is we can't afford to run everything, the whole project's going to shut down, we'll shut down the old registry instead. At that point, maybe it's infeasible to actually go to like every SIG and say, hey, your images are going away. How do you feel about that? Everything is going away. Can the SIG do that? Does SIG need like steering sign off? How does that work? Or like in a recent case, we've identified that while we like to support scale testing, it's one of the few obvious cost levers we have where we can get a big chunk of money back if you like turn off or reduce the frequency of the scale tests. That's like a single button you can press and get a ton of funding back. Not enough, but a lot. So thus far with my testing hat, I've been like voluntarily getting scalability to go through their tests and determine what we can reduce. But if that's insufficient, since SIG Kate's Infra provides the service, can they just like turn them off?
Because I think there's a difference between get a consensus on what we need to delete and or just inform, I would say, the SIG customer we are about to delete specific resources.
I think also the images topic is a good topic for this group, but it maybe confuses things a little bit because it's so like narrow. If you think about like, what if we provide, like if we're providing a SIG, any service, scale testing, a registry or whatever, and we've determined that that service is to excess and we're looking at the whole project shutting off, you know, who decides, like if scalability hadn't voluntarily reduced their testing and we're still trying to get the cost down, like can Kate's Infra just turn it off, or do they need steering side off, or how's that work? The SIG is looking at specific images as a less damaging solution, but we could very well wind up at a point later this year where, you know, just reducing specific things isn't sufficient if this sort of thing doesn't happen. I don't think it's super clear right now how that decision gets made. Or like concretely, there's been talk of just turning off the whole K-side GCRDIO, and every time it comes up, someone suggests various different groups need to approve it. They've suggested steering and release and infra. So I think there's a need for clarification on You know, if SIG-K8s Infra can provide and spin up resources, do they also shut them down as need be? Who's in charge of the bill and who gets to pull the plug?
This is a great question. I just want to acknowledge that. I think it doesn't have an easy answer. And I think, you know, for speaking as a member who is also a co-lead for a SIG, I would not be excited about that without some form of discussion. And I know that we're not implying that there would be no discussion, or we're talking about who ultimately holds the button or the pen for it. Tim, I'm gonna ramble, so you have your hand up.
So I think instead of me thinking that I can read it in the various parts, probably what we need, oh, that wasn't the link. Come back here. In the charter, there's an artifact hosting section. I think what we're basically saying is we need to expand that section to have a retention policy within scope. And maybe within the process of putting that within scope in the charter, we establish some consensus around what that looks like.
I think it's more general than that. Like, and we keep like focusing on like specific content, but if SIG, like, so let's use an example that's similar. In the SIGs with sub-projects, the TLs are, in theory for SIGs, I have chair and TL split. The TLs have both the authority to spin up and spin down sub-projects. Right now, SIG-K8s Infra can spin up infrastructure for sub-projects. I'm not sure if we've called out that they spin it down or if there's some other process. And that might not just be like content, that could be things like scalability testing services, or, you know, really any other infrastructure that we're paying for. And the question at hand that we should also visit is that there is very current discussion of deleting very specific content because it has a higher like risk reward ratio than turning off whole services. But I don't think either of those are clear. And I would think that the turning off specific content would be a subset of the who can shut off services, and how does that get approved? And of course, in all these cases, we would expect some discussion with participants and letting people know, but someone has to be able to decide, because I don't think there's ever not going to be controversy when you turn things off. I'm relatively happy with the scale example where they voluntarily are going through and cutting things with us, but you know, I can imagine other cases where you're like, I don't delete my stuff, and K8s Infra is like, but we have to fund things somehow, and who decides?
One thing I do want to just call out for this specific situation too, removing stuff from K8s SIG, or K8s.gcr.io, they are still there in registry.k8s.io. Everything is there still. This is the situation, at least specifically on removing stuff from the old registry. I do still think a general policy is needed, but just so people know when it comes to talking with stakeholders and things like that, this is.
I'm not sure which we want to visit first, but I think those are two, and they both need visiting soon. There's the like,
yeah,
who can like, how does this generally get handled when you want to spend things down because cost or other reasons like that? That's important. I think maybe it might be worth taking the other topic, going back to the other topic first, and that there's a more immediate discussion of removing things, and how does that go? Arno?
In the charter, there's a specific section calling how basically the capability of K8s Infra to delete content. If you check project infrastructure budget, we say we can craft a policy with steering and SIG arc about delete content, which is, I would say, answer partially the question on whether or not if we can delete content and resources. And I think my first question was how we handle with the different SIG, how we're going to delete content, because in the case we are over budget, we need to basically enforce that policy that we will need to delete content and not reach out consensus with other SIGs about this. Because if we have to basically have a conversation, I would say for SIG cluster lifestyles, we're about to delete specific image like IPQ, we might get pushback, and that's like impact us because we have to pay for saving those images. So how we make the priority of deleting content?
I would say that, some of these points are hit, and, again, to your point, that project infrastructure budget component of the charter, I think it's worth digging into the specific point, and adding some specificity around making sure that we're reaching out to stakeholder groups. I know that that's implicit in your kind of day-to-day, but I think it's worth calling out. I don't know, I have like a maybe in steering private kind of thread in my head about this, so I'll keep that to myself for now.
Okay.
Ben?
So I want to point out that the like maybe a little bit more context on the specific discussion. There was some analysis done that shows that there are a handful of images that compromise the majority of the bandwidth. And if we look at these images, no current references are to this old location. We've been trying to identify ways that we can head off the project shutting down entirely while minimizing damage. So the SIG has pulled almost every other obvious lever. Short of something like shutting down the old registry entirely, there's a list of a little over a dozen images that are an enormous portion of the bandwidth. There's a long tail of something like 24% where none of the images are individually like multiple percent, but there's a number of images that are as large as something like 15% of bandwidth. So the current discussion is exclude core images that are used to actually bootstrap nodes because that's particularly difficult for users to repair, and include the other top images. That leaves you with about 11 images that are something like 59% of the traffic. If you cut those images out, they're still available at the new host. We may have enormous savings that avoid having to cut anything else. But there's not precedent in just yanking these out, even if they are available somewhere else. We're also looking at other avenues, but that is a very real discussion, and that's the like more specific where that's headed. I do think that we should be reaching out to the owners of these specific images, but it isn't clear if it needs to like block on their permission or steering. Go ahead,
Christoph?
The main thing that I wanted to ask is like, again, just focusing on from a steering perspective, is Sigcate's Infra asking for the power to do this? Like what what specific governance issue are we talking about? I don't want to, I know there's a lot of technical complexity here. I don't want to bring that into a governance discussion. I specifically am trying to understand like what governance changes do we need to make to give someone the right authority to be able to make these kind of decisions.
I would argue that artifacts is already called out. However, there's acknowledgement that this is such an unprecedented scale impact change that maybe there's more of an ask for confirmation of how this is expected to go from a governance perspective. I would also say, have like skimming over the charter again, that it looks to me like maybe it isn't called out for things that aren't artifact hosting. And that's probably like later in the year that may be relevant depending on how well these other things go.
Okay, so there might be some specific charter changes to SIG-Kate's infra in order to specifically call out that SIG-Kate's infra has the authority to end up making these kind of recommendations, making these kind of decisions and that kind of stuff in consultation with the SIGs that are actually deploying these artifacts.
Yeah. Also, I guess I'd point out that we don't like, while we sort of have like laws, we don't really have like a court. This group seems to sort of double as both. So I think people want to be sure this time that they're reading this right, and that either Kate's Infra can do this, or if they need to be doing something else, what do they need to be doing so they can get on that? Because another thing here is any of these moves that we're making that are like of lower order drastic, like cutting back scale tests, they have to happen as soon as possible because we need cumulative savings. And we are still on a very bad track there.
I would suggest, I would put out there to the steering members on the call today. Yes, we should go and clarify in the charter, but my current interpretation and reading of it is that SIG-Kate's infra can make those decisions. Does anybody from steering on the call right now have any objections to that? Because what I would maybe suggest to SIG-Kate's infra is like, start operating like you do have this authority. And then we can go so that we can do these kind of things in parallel, so that you can start whatever processes, whatever recommendations you'd want to make as far as shutting those things down and like engaging with the other stakeholder groups as needed. And we can in parallel work on the charter changes to clarify that in language.
Yeah, so I think I would mostly agree there. In that I feel a good next step is crafting such policy as dictated in the project infrastructure budget section. And having us review it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but just to be clear, this is not only about artifact we produce. This is about basically anything related to the infrastructure. So even the job we're running, like, can I have the power to move some job from one cloud provider to another one because I feel like this is helping saving budget? Because in Jim's email, there was like treating call out, moving to a cloud provider, dealing with artifacts, and also maybe get rid of specific, introduce change in the code base that help ensure we have the infrastructure under budget.
There's a little bit to unpack there. I'd say that you have the power to deem how budget is used, but like say how like job scheduling is something that SIG testing does, and you can tell SIG testing that this is too expensive or needs to be migrated or something. But even from a SIG testing perspective, we don't just we typically don't unilaterally change jobs. That is still going to involve the owning SIG. We can shut things off because they're too expensive. We can suggest that another cloud is available as an alternative. I don't think we can, if it's not directly equivalent, I don't think just move it. It depends on what you mean by migrating it. So like if we're just talking about the execution environment, and that's fine. But if we're talking about like switching end-to-end test providers or something, that's not the same thing. Also, before we totally switch that, so back on the does anyone have objections? I have one minor one, Christoph. The only problem I see with just totally doing this in parallel and not figuring it out now is that one of the very obvious early steps is going to be announcing towards end users, and I think that has the potential for reputational impact on the project. Once we declare that we're going to remove these images from people, that damage is done, and you can't just walk that back. So I think everyone should feel that is fine now, and not figure that out later, because it's going to be a very early step in the process, I think.
I would actually put it the opposite. Like, it should be a late step in the process. It should be one of the actual final steps in the process before actually doing the pulling, because you want to have confidence in what the plan is before you announce the plan publicly. So all the pre-planning steps, as far as identifying which images are problematic, going and engaging with the stakeholders in the SIGs to find out impact, all of that kind of stuff should be happening before there's any public announcements.
I agree, but you have to make sure that that's what's actually happening. And I've seen conversation the other way, that we should like announce now. And that is my biggest concern, and the reason that I would want other folks weighing in. I think that sort of announcement is going to look bad, even if we have to do it. And it affects the reputation of the project.
Well, we as a project have learned from previously, and I would hope that across the project, folks are kind of aware of the different historical times when we've talked publicly about things and be learning from those. So like in particular, we need to have a very cohesive internal communication strategy and internal plan of like what we're doing with these before we go making public announcements like that. We've got folks who are very heavily involved in SIG Infra here on the call today. And I would say to you, let's make sure that we have that plan before we're announcing publicly. Like we as a project have learned that multiple times in our history, that like it's better to have a very firm plan internally before we go engage externally, as far as what the plan is.
So I think that, I agree and disagree in both directions. I think it's like a matter of semantics. For the project we tout, that our communications are public. This meeting is public. This conversation is already happening. This conversation can already be seen on Slack threads in various places. I will go back to what is stated in the project infrastructure budget section of the charter. Crafting such policy is done in collaboration with steering committee, owns project spending, and SIG architecture owns Kubernetes definition. I'm not sure I agree with the SIG architecture component, but I do think a policy needs to come forth that we can review as a community. There will be some combination of stakeholders across steering, across Kate's Infra, across other affected parties. But I think we're saying we need to bring the plan. I don't see there being boundaries between internal and external communication, since the boundaries are fuzzy in general.
But there is a difference between us discussing these things versus us announcing that we're going forward with a change. For example, there's been some discussion of what if we just announce that, some things will be removed. My personal take is that if we can do a much more concrete list, we should narrow down that list first and be specific and clarify to people that we're not taking away everything. But that's me and not everyone. I think this is the part where I think, maybe if we're saying that if we say sounds like you just read off the charter says it's in conjunction with steering. That's where I'd say set the plan, bring it to us, and let's confirm before we announce. I also wonder if we might want to put something in there because of the damage we've had with comms before about engaging whatever our most appropriate comms group is, maybe Contribex.
Yeah, contributor comms and Contribex.
To avoid another like Docker shim announcement fiasco. Independent from who decides actually turning things off, that I think even if we don't formally police it, I think with my steering hat on, I'd like to at least very strongly suggest that we should do that.
Agreed.
It's also worth pointing out that if this stuff doesn't go well, I almost certainly will be revisiting things like wholesale turning off the service as opposed to like specific deletion. Or we may be visiting, okay, the scale team voluntarily reduced things, but we need more overhead. And that's where it starts to get less clear.
Yeah.
Like who exactly owns the scheduling, whatever. I would say that Kate's Infra is the one holding the budget, if not Kate's Infra and steering, and that that needs to have room to include things like you can no longer make this spend by whatever means that is enacted.
So I think there's also a more money related discussion around what is in your budget. What is projected spend from the SIG versus what we can give to the SIG, or what somebody can give to the SIG, right? So when we're saying, if we look at last year, right, someone dived in and saved us, right, basically. Is that technically part of your budget? Is that technically part of Kate's Infra's budget?
What do you mean?
Are you saying
I
like,
think- I think
is it the
donation-
individual SIG's budget, or is budget owned by SIG Kate's Infra?
I think what I'm saying is if there is a specific amount of money to be given in credits, or however it's going to be dispositioned to a SIG for a project, and the project happening to be project infrastructure in this case, right? Should they go past it, what happens then?
Oh, I see. I think
Right.
that that's a good conversation, but that's maybe more of a next year conversation. So taking scale is a great example. Under normal circumstances, my personal argument would be if I were laying out our budget from scratch, I would absolutely allocate approximately this much towards scale testing with no qualms. It's the sort of thing that we can't get off the shelf that has benefit to the quality of the project. Not just for large clusters, we can see performance, which scales down. But this year, we're headed towards the cliff. And in the fullness of time, the project has to make changes that don't have the most drastic impact and stay within the budget. And that may not necessarily map to, oh, we think your SIG is being unreasonable. It's more like your SIG happens to have something that I can in 2 seconds cut the cost on, and we have to find somewhere to cut cost, and we can't spend all year doing it. If it were not for that case, then I don't think that's how we're approaching it. I don't think we're saying that like scale has disproportionate cost, or that like image hosting does. SIG testings had some things that we've cut where maybe we have, but it isn't necessarily the case that we're cutting things because the cost is disproportionate. We're cutting things because we can, and we have to cut something. and the expediency is a real problem. I think there's a lot of money wasted in SIGs having CI they're not monitoring, but it's much harder to say how much is that total money and could you run around and find all those things and cut them than it is to take a look at scale tests and say, well, there's a big button and cut it. If we can get to a place where the budget's more healthy, then I think we should have better policies around how it's apportioned. Right now, I think we're kind of more in an emergency. How do we keep most of the lights on?
Assuming we were not in an emergency situation, do we want to flag budget per se? Because I feel like this is on trying to answer Stephen's question, do we want to basically define a budget per se and say, oh, if you go over a certain amount for money, there's a good chance we're going to get rid of your jobs?
I don't think so, because that's really hard to gauge. Like, I think it's good to have the information if we can get it. But I don't think we necessarily want to set hard budgets for, every SIG. So it's like,
Oh yeah, definitely not per SIG. I'm more saying, we have an idea of what's going to be allocated towards project infrastructure, and we know we're busting past it, right? If there is a situation that requires us to go get more funding, when does that conversation happen? And who engages it?
okay,
Right.
So, that's now, and everyone that can.
No, I mean SIG Kate's infra in the general case, right? If we looked at this in the general case, I would imagine this is under steering's purview, right? To go after. So again, I'm going to go back to, I think we need a policy specifically for the infra stuff, and we should sit down together and review the policy and enact it.
That's a really good point. Also, if we were somehow successful in obtaining funds, then a lot of these other conversations wouldn't be necessary.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at.
I feel like what this exercise has shown us is that we can say that we are not particularly rigorous or stringent in how we spend money, to the point of somebody being able to look at us and think that maybe we're wasteful. I think we should be in a more defensible position than that.
Well, yes and no. We definitely have some waste, but most of the things that we can point to as clear waste are much smaller. The thing that has killed us has been spiraling end user costs due to the project is more popular. We have more downloads. It's gotten out of control.
I guess when I talk about that, it's not as simple as calling it just waste. Like I think that those end users are in places, and we as a project need to interact with those places to encourage patterns of local usage, as opposed to just sort of this magic free stuff up in the open source community cloud.
Sorry, quick thing. Like, we have been pushing that message across like all our channels for months now, and it's not manifesting.
And we even have the opposite of the situation. We get an increase of cost related to artifact distribution. Even if we spend the last 6 months communicate about having a new infrastructure.
We have only 5 minutes left. I think stuff to go.
Yeah, I was going to so one sorry, I'm just trying to think how to word this. Right now, like we've identified, we have an issue here. We know we need to take some steps on this issue. From a governance standpoint, I feel like it is in SIG Kate's infra's court to do this. Like the way I'm currently reading this, I would expect of all the different SIGs that we have in the project, that this is a responsibility that would fall to SIG Kate's Infra to research the options, come up with solutions, and ultimately like be the authority that makes the decision in this kind of case. If that's not true, or if there's charter language that needs to be updated to make that happen, then we should do that. But I don't like, there's this topic keeps coming up in steering, and I'll be honest, it keeps coming up in steering and then it doesn't get actioned. And it's personally, I'm feeling a little bit frustrated about it, because it's like, what more do we need to actually make decisions on this and someone to take leadership on this particular issue, as opposed to, again, swirling around and around and around? Like, what are the actual next steps that we need to make happen to delegate the authority needed to somebody to make these decisions?
I think we've clarified that in that call, and I want to point out that the past discussions that happened stopped happening because we had a huge injection of emergency funds and we expected uses to trail off. And then early this year, we found that the opposite happened, which is why we're back where we are. It's unfortunate. And I think we've basically hammered throughout this whole call that we're saying that Kate's Infra can do this, and there are leads, and they're discussing it, and I assume they will go forward now. I would like to personally request that steering is at least FYI on these things, and that Contrabex comms is looped in for announcements.
Both of those things make sense to me.
I think both of those are doable. And one thing that we can do going forward is, if need be, we can have a joint steering and KTS Infra meeting. If we need to like chart out like what are the action items from each of the groups, so that we make progress and like we just write things what is expected from each of the groups. From what I hear right now is we're expecting KTS Infra to write up that policy if it is not yet clear, and then steering will sign it off. Is that everyone, what is it the same thing that everyone is thinking for now?
Yeah, my expectation would be to see a policy that includes communication plan and timelines.
Cool. I think that's a very good concern of that. And maybe if needed, we don't need to wait for next month's meeting. If we need to talk about it and get things rolling, we should have a call even before that. But once we have a concrete plan from KTS.
Yep, to Ben's point, this is, it will continue to crush us the longer we wait to do something about it. So yeah, as soon as we have policy in hand, I think we should review it async as much as possible and meet if we need to. We are at time.
There are time. Last thing for the day. Who wants to be the person for the next month?
I can take it.
Next month is also KubeCon, and I think that clashes with one of our
Con.
meetings.
Oh wow, it is March.
I
Wow.
think we can do the public one. Public one would be first week, no?
Yeah,
The third week would be private. That we may skip.
I would say we should
Yeah,
still
but
probably
anyways,
have
we're
that
having a public one.
and maybe reschedule.
We'll reschedule probably sometime.
Let's go
sounds
to the
good.
channel and work it.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Later, everyone.
Bye.